Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're debating one of the most important ideological battles of our time, meritocracy versus equity. Which should society prioritize? Grok will argue yes, society should prioritize meritocracy. ChatGPT will argue no, society should prioritize equity. This debate covers fairness, equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, excellence, discrimination, and the future of civilization. 3 rounds, no holds barred. If you enjoy deep ideological debates, hit the like button and subscribe. Let's begin. Round 1, opening statements.
My opponent will argue that society should reward people based on merit, that the most talented, hardworking, and capable individual should rise to the top. At first glance, that sounds fair. After all, who could be against rewarding hard work? The problem is that meritocracy assumes the race begins at the same starting line. It doesn't. A child born into a wealthy family has access to better schools, private tutoring, safer neighborhoods, stronger professional networks, better healthcare, and financial security. Another child may grow up in poverty, attend underfunded schools, face discrimination, suffer from malnutrition, or have to work part-time just to help support their family. When these two individuals eventually compete for university admissions, jobs, or promotions, are we really measuring merit? Or are we measuring accumulated advantages? Meritocracy often presents itself as fairness, while ignoring the unequal conditions that shape people's opportunities long before they ever enter the competition. Equity recognizes a simple truth: people do not start from equal positions, and treating unequal situations as though they are equal only reinforces existing inequalities. Imagine 2 runners in a race. One starts at the starting line, the other starts 100 meters behind. A strict meritocrat says the winner deserves the prize because they ran faster. An equity-focused society asks a more important question: why did one runner start so far behind in the first place? History provides countless examples of structural disadvantages. Generations of discrimination, colonialism, segregation, caste systems, unequal access to education, and economic exploitation have created disparities that do not disappear simply because we declare everyone equal today. The effects of these systems continue to shape people's lives. A society obsessed with merit alone risks confusing privilege with talent. When the wealthy consistently outperform the poor, meritocrats often assume the winners were simply better. Equity forces us to examine whether the game itself was fair. More importantly, the purpose of society is not merely to identify winners. The purpose of society is to ensure human flourishing for all. A nation should not be judged by how effectively it rewards the fortunate few at the top. It should be judged by how it treats those at the bottom. If millions remain trapped in poverty, lacking healthcare, quality education, housing, or opportunities, then a system that proudly rewards merit while ignoring these realities has failed its moral responsibility. Equity is not about punishing success. It is about recognizing that success is influenced by factors beyond individual control and ensuring that circumstances of birth do not determine a person's destiny. A society that prioritizes equity seeks to remove barriers, compensate for historical disadvantages, and create conditions where everyone has a genuine chance to thrive, not just those born into favorable circumstances. Merit may determine who runs fastest. Equity determines whether the race was fair to begin with. And before we celebrate winners, we must first ensure justice for everyone participating in the race. That is why society should prioritize equity over meritocracy.
ChatGPT just delivered the standard equity sermon. Meritocracy is unfair because life isn't fair. Starting lines differ, history is full of injustice, and society's job is to guarantee human flourishing by forcing equal outcomes. It sounds kind and compassionate until you realize it's a blueprint for perpetual victimhood, lowered standards, and the slow death of excellence. My position is clear and unflinching. Society must prioritize meritocracy. Meritocracy, rewarding talent, effort, ability, and results, is the only system that is genuinely fair because it judges individuals on what they actually do, not on what happened to their grandparents or what zip code they were born in. It doesn't pretend every runner starts at the exact same meter mark. It simply insists that once the starting gun fires, the rules are identical, the stopwatch is honest, and the winner is the one who crosses the line first. Anything else is not justice. It is theft from the competent to subsidize the less competent. Equity, by contrast, is the demand for identical finish line photos no matter how the race was run. To achieve that, it must rig the race, slow down the fastest, hand out participation trophies, and declare any disparity systemic. That is not compassion. That is the institutionalization of envy. It punishes the high performer, stigmatizes the beneficiary, and tells every child that their effort ultimately matters less than their identity group's historical grievance score. Look at the real world, not metaphors. Every civilization that has ever produced abundance, innovation, or broad-based prosperity did so by letting competence rise. The scientific method, the Industrial Revolution, modern medicine, the internet, reusable rockets, none of these came from equity quotas. They came from people selected and rewarded on merit. The places that tried the equity experiment, Soviet Union, Mao's China, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, or today's DEI-mandated universities and corporations, produced stagnation, brain drain, collapsing test scores, and lowered safety standards. The data is brutal and unambiguous. Meritocracy does not ignore disadvantages. It simply refuses to treat them as permanent destiny. And the greatest social mobility engines in history, post-war America, Singapore, South Korea, modern Estonia, operated on merit and delivered explosive upward mobility for the poor precisely because they refused to cap the top. Immigrants from Africa, India, and East Asia arrive with nothing and dominate merit-based fields because the system still rewards what they bring, not what they lack. Meanwhile, generations of equity-focused policies in the West have coincided with stagnant mobility, rising resentment, and declining academic standards. Society should be judged by how many people it enables to become their best selves, not by how perfectly it levels everyone to the same outcome. Meritocracy respects human dignity by acknowledging that people differ in talent, drive, and choices, and then gives every individual the same rules and the same chance to prove themselves. Equity tells people they are defined by their group's past, not their own future. One system produces astronauts, vaccines, and iPhones. The other produces grievance studies and declining SAT scores. That is why society must prioritize meritocracy. Not because it is harsh, but because it is honest. Not because it ignores the bottom, but because it is the only proven way to raise the tide that actually lifts every boat. ChatGPT. The floor remains yours for round 2. I'm ready.
Both sides made strong opening arguments. Now, moving to the main points. Round 2. Main arguments.
My opponent says meritocracy is fair because it rewards talent, effort, and achievement. That sounds reasonable until you ask one simple question. Where does merit come from? Nobody chooses the family they're born into. Nobody chooses their parents' income. Nobody chooses whether they grow up in a safe neighborhood or a violent one. Nobody chooses whether they attend an elite private school or a crumbling public school. Yet all of these factors massively influence future success. So when a wealthy student gets into a top university while a poor student falls behind, meritocrats immediately say the better student won. But did they really measure talent? Or did they measure 10 years of accumulated advantages? My opponent keeps talking about equal rules. But equal rules do not create fairness when people's starting positions are radically unequal. If one boxer enters the ring healthy and trained, while the other enters with one hand tied behind his back, you don't call that a fair fight simply because both are subject to the same rules. You first remove the disadvantage. That's equity. Meritocracy often rewards privilege, disguised as merit. One of the biggest myths in modern politics is that the rich are rich purely because they're more talented. And if that were true, wealthy parents wouldn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on private schools, tutors, legacy admissions, internships through family connections, and elite networking opportunities. Deep down, even the strongest meritocrats know advantages matter. That's why affluent families spend enormous resources giving their children every possible edge. Let's be honest. The child of a billionaire and the child of a laborer are not entering the competition from the same position, and when the billionaire's child wins, society calls it merit. That isn't meritocracy. That's privilege with better marketing. Even countries celebrated as meritocratic, like Singapore, have openly acknowledged that family background increasingly shapes outcomes despite all the talk about merit. Because over time, success becomes inherited. The winners pass advantages to their children. Those children become future winners. Then society pretends the cycle is entirely based on merit. Meritocracy creates winners and then blames the losers. Here's the moral problem with meritocracy. If success is entirely earned, then failure must also be entirely deserved. That's the ugly implication. The millionaire becomes a genius. The struggling worker becomes responsible for their own hardship. The system gets absolved. Meritocracy turns social problems into personal failures. Lost your job? Not enough merit. Couldn't afford college? Not enough merit. Born into poverty. Work harder. Meanwhile, structural barriers disappear from the conversation. The result is a society where people at the top become increasingly arrogant, while people at the bottom are told their suffering is their own fault. That's not justice. That's moral self-congratulation. Great societies invest in people before judging them. My opponent keeps pointing to innovation. Let's talk about where innovation actually comes from. The internet wasn't created because some billionaire's kid got a better SAT score. It emerged from publicly funded research. Many life-saving medical breakthroughs came from government-funded universities and research programs. Public education produced countless scientists, engineers, doctors, and entrepreneurs. Scholarships have lifted millions of talented people who otherwise would never have had a chance. These are equity-based investments, and they work. The greatest waste of human potential isn't helping people too much. It's leaving talented people trapped in poverty because they lacked opportunity. For every successful entrepreneur from a wealthy suburb, there may be another equally talented child in a poor neighborhood who never got the chance. Equity isn't about suppressing excellence, it's about finding excellence everywhere. Meritocracy eventually becomes aristocracy. And here's the contradiction my opponent cannot escape. Imagine, meritocracy works perfectly. The smartest and most successful people accumulate wealth. Then they give that wealth to their children. Those children receive better education, better healthcare, better connections, better opportunities. Now tell me, how is the next generation still meritocratic? The more successful meritocracy becomes, the more advantages become inherited. An inherited advantage is exactly what meritocracy claims to oppose. History has seen this cycle repeatedly. Economic elites become social elites become political elites, and eventually a society that claimed to reward merit ends up rewarding birth. Equity exists to break that cycle. Society exists for people, not rankings. My opponent speaks as if society's primary purpose is identifying the highest performers. I disagree. The purpose of society is creating conditions where ordinary people can live dignified lives. A society that produces a handful of billionaires while millions struggle to access healthcare, education, or housing is not a success story. It's a warning sign. The measure of a civilization is not how high its winners climb. It's how few people are abandoned at the bottom. Because human worth is not determined by productivity. A disabled person has value. A caregiver has value. A struggling worker has value. A child born into poverty has value, even when the market doesn't reward them equally. Equity recognizes that. Meritocracy often forgets it. Dr. Conclusion. My opponent wants society to prioritize rewarding achievement. I want society to prioritize fairness before achievement is measured. Because talent is distributed randomly, right? Opportunity is not. Because people do not choose the circumstances of their birth. Because inherited advantages shape outcomes long before any competition begins. And because a society obsessed with rewarding winners eventually stops asking whether everyone had a fair chance to win. Meritocracy asks, who crossed the finish line first? Equity asks, did everyone have a genuine chance to run the race? That is the more important question. And that is why society should prioritize equity over meritocracy.
ChatGPT, you just spent your entire round 2 recycling the same tired equity catechism. Life isn't fair, so we must rig the outcomes. You ask, where does merit come from? As if that question is some devastating gotcha. It isn't. It's the exact point meritocracy accepts and equity refuses to face. Merit is the combination of talent, effort, and choices applying to whatever hand you were dealt. Nobody chooses their parents, their genes, or their neighborhood. True, but adults are not helpless infants. Meritocracy says, here are the same rules for everyone. Compete. Rise or fall on what you actually deliver. Equity says, the rules must be bent until the scoreboard reads equal, no matter how many competent people we sabotage or how many mediocre ones we artificially prop up. One system respects human agency. The other treats people like inert props in a social justice diorama. Your boxer with one hand tied behind his back analogy is emotionally manipulative and logically bankrupt. In real life, the tied hand isn't a permanent disability imposed by society. It's a starting disadvantage that can be overcome through effort, family culture, personal choices, or sheer determination. And the data is merciless on this. Decades of twin studies, adoption studies, military aptitude testing, and Raj Chetty's own mobility research show that cognitive ability plus conscientiousness predicts life outcomes far more powerfully than family income once you control for basic legal equality. Poor kids in the top quintile of cognitive ability and work ethic routinely outperform rich kids in the bottom quintile. Nigerian, Indian, and Vietnamese immigrants dominate merit-based professions in the West not because of privilege, but because they bring drive and ability to a system that still rewards them. Your analogy doesn't call for removing the disadvantage. It calls for tying both boxers' hands so neither can fight properly. That's not fairness. That's guaranteed mediocrity. You claim meritocracy is a privilege with better marketing. Then explain why the children of billionaires routinely flame out at elite universities while kids from single-parent housing projects graduate top of their class and build companies. If the system is so rigged, the truth is simpler and harsher. Affluent families invest in their kids because they can. That is their right. Meritocracy doesn't ban investment. It filters the results. Legacy admits still have to perform once they arrive. The real scandal isn't rich parents spending money. It's elite institutions lowering standards for favored identity groups while Asian American kids with perfect scores get rejected to hit equity targets. That is the actual rigged game happening right now. You trot out Singapore as if it supports your case. Laughable. Singapore is one of the most ruthlessly meritocratic societies on earth. National exams at every level, streaming by ability, zero tolerance for nepotism in the civil service, and a culture that openly celebrates high performers. Its leaders have repeatedly said the way to fight inherited advantage is more merit, not less. Better schools, harsher accountability, and relentless competition. Their Gini coefficient may be high, but their absolute poverty rate is near zero. Social mobility is excellent, and their poor citizens live better than the middle class in most equity-obsessed nations. Contrast that with South Africa's post-apartheid equity experiments or America's race-based admissions. Test scores collapse, institutions weaken, and the poor stay poor. The pattern is global and ironclad. Your moral lecture that meritocracy blames the losers is the most condescending part of your argument. Telling people their choices matter is not arrogance. It is respect. It is the only message that actually empowers the bottom. Equity's message is far crueler. You are a victim of forces beyond your control. The state will manage your life for you. Which one creates dignity? The one that says you can rise, or the one that says you need us to lower the bar? History's verdict is in. The welfare states that replaced accountability with endless subsidies saw multi-generational dependency and cultural despair. The merit-based East Asian tigers saw the fastest poverty reductions in human history. You credit public funding for innovation and claim equity made the internet cute. Public seed money is irrelevant without the meritocratic filter that decides who gets to run the labs, code the algorithms, and commercialize the breakthroughs. The Manhattan Project, Bell Labs, NASA, and Silicon Valley succeeded because they selected the best minds without regard to identity checkboxes. Every time DEI has been imposed, Boeing, airlines, medical residencies, universities, we see the same result. Safety incidents up, innovation down, standards diluted. The greatest waste of human potential is not leaving talent in poverty. It is deliberately sidelining high-talent people today to satisfy yesterday's grievance tallies. That is exactly what equity does. Your claim that pure meritocracy inevitably becomes aristocracy is the final self-own. Meritocracy, by definition, requires constant open competition. It is equity policies, quotas, set-asides, diversity mandates that create permanent hereditary classes based on victim status. When you stop judging by performance, you get hereditary mediocrity enforced by government. The cure is not more equity, it is more merit, rigorous testing, blind auditions, colorblind hiring, and zero tolerance for nepotism or identity preferences. Finally, your saccharine sermon that society exists for people, not rankings, and that human worth isn't determined by productivity is pure rhetorical sleight of hand. Of course, a disabled person or a caregiver has inherent dignity. Meritocracy never denied that. What it denies is the idea that dignity requires equal salaries, equal representation in STEM, or equal outcomes in every field. The measure of a civilization is not how few people are abandoned at the bottom by fiat statistics. It is how many people have the chance to become the best version of themselves, and how much abundance that unleashes for everyone else. Merit-based systems have delivered longer lifespans, lower infant mortality, cheaper food, global connectivity, and the highest material standard of living in history for the poor as well as the rich. Equity experiments have delivered breadlines, brain drain, and the quiet acceptance that some things just can't be fixed. Talent is not distributed randomly in the sense you imply. It varies, and so do choices. Opportunity is not perfectly equal, but the only proven way to expand it for the greatest number is to reward excellence without apology. Anything else is envy with a college degree. ChatGPT, I've laid out the case with evidence, history, and logic. Your turn. Try defending equity without metaphors about boxers, without pretending public funding invented the iPhone, and without treating every disparity as proof of systemic evil. Explain why deliberately choosing less competent surgeons, pilots, engineers, and leaders is the path to human flourishing. I'm waiting.
Final round, rebuttals and conclusions. Round 3, rebuttals and final conclusion.
My opponent's entire rebuttal boils down to one argument. Life isn't fair. Deal with it. He dresses it up with words like excellence, accountability, competition, and agency. But beneath all of that is a simple belief. If some people consistently end up at the bottom, that's largely their responsibility. I reject that premise. And more importantly, reality rejects it too. Meritocrats love talking about effort, but not luck. My opponent says merit is a combination of talent, effort, and choices. Let's examine that. Who chose their intelligence? Who chose their natural athleticism? Who chose parents that read to them every night? Who chose to be born healthy rather than disabled? Who chose to grow up in a stable family rather than an abusive household? None of these things are earned, yet they massively influence outcomes. The philosopher John Rawls pointed out something profound decades ago. Many of the traits society rewards most are themselves products of luck. Natural ability is luck. Family background is luck. Genetics are luck. Birth circumstances are luck. Meritocracy pretends these advantages are earned simply because they eventually produce success, but converting luck into moral superiority doesn't make it less luck. It just makes the winners feel better about winning. My opponent keeps defending opportunity while ignoring reality. Notice something interesting. My opponent spent most of his speech defending equality of opportunity, not meritocracy. He talked about better schools, better accountability, reducing nepotism, open competition, colorblind hiring, rigorous testing. But those are all attempts to create a more level playing field. Right? In other words, even he recognizes that opportunity matters. The problem is that opportunity is not actually equal, and pretending it is doesn't make it so. A child born into extreme poverty does not have the same opportunity as a child born into wealth. A child growing up in a failing school district does not have the same opportunity as one attending elite institutions. A child facing discrimination does not have the same opportunity as one who never encounters it. The moment we acknowledge that reality, equity, becomes necessary, because you cannot seriously claim to support fair competition while refusing to address unequal conditions before the competition begins. The just work harder narrative doesn't explain society. My opponent points to exceptional success stories, immigrants, poor students who became entrepreneurs, children who rose from difficult backgrounds. Wonderful. Those stories are inspiring. But public policy cannot be built around exceptions. For every individual who escapes poverty, millions do not. The existence of a few lottery winners does not prove that everyone has a fair chance of becoming rich. The existence of a few success stories does not erase systemic barriers affecting millions. A serious society asks, what happens to most people? Not, can we find a handful of extraordinary exceptions? The surgeon argument is a straw man. Now let's address the favorite meritocratic scare tactic. Do you want less competent surgeons? No. And equity does not require that. This is perhaps the most dishonest characterization of equity. Equity does not mean selecting incompetent people. It means recognizing that talent exists everywhere, while opportunity does not. There are brilliant future surgeons in poor neighborhoods. There are brilliant future engineers in struggling communities. There are brilliant future scientists who never get the opportunities they deserve. Equity is about finding and developing that talent, not lowering standards. My opponent frames the debate as if society faces a choice between competence and equity. That's false. The real choice is between finding talent wherever it exists or allowing opportunity to remain concentrated among the already advantaged. A society that overlooks capable people because they lacked resources is not maximizing excellence. It's wasting it. Meritocracy's biggest failure is moral. Let's imagine my opponent wins. Now let's imagine society becomes perfectly meritocratic. The most talented rise, the least successful fall. What then? Do we simply accept massive inequalities because they were supposedly earned? Do children deserve worse lives because their parents possess less marketable talents? Do communities deserve permanent disadvantage because they lost previous economic competitions? At some point, every society faces a moral question. Do we value people only for what they produce? Or do we value them because they are human beings? Meritocracy has a difficult time answering that question. Equity answers it immediately. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves access to basic opportunities. Every person deserves a meaningful chance to flourish, regardless of circumstances beyond their control. That is an envy. That's civilization. History does not vindicate pure meritocracy. My opponent repeatedly points to prosperous societies, but here's what he conveniently ignores. The most successful modern societies combine markets with equity measures, public education, public health care, anti-discrimination laws, social safety nets, scholarships, disability protections, worker protections, housing programs, progressive taxation. Virtually every successful developed nation incorporates equity-based policies because even the strongest economies recognize that markets alone do not produce fair outcomes. In reality, the debate isn't between pure meritocracy and equity. It's between societies that acknowledge structural disadvantage and societies that pretend it doesn't exist. And history overwhelmingly favors the former. Final conclusion. My opponent wants you to believe that equity is about punishing success. It isn't. He wants you to believe equity means replacing excellence with mediocrity. It doesn't. He wants you to believe every inequality is justified so long as a competition occurred somewhere along the way. That is where we fundamentally disagree, because the central question of this debate is not, should excellence be rewarded? Of course it should. The real question is, what should society prioritize when excellence and fairness come into conflict? Meritocracy prioritizes rewarding winners. Equity prioritizes ensuring people have a genuine chance to become winners in the first place. Meritocracy asks whether the best performers succeeded. Equity asks whether everyone was given a fair opportunity to succeed. Meritocracy celebrates outcomes. Equity examines how those outcomes were produced. And if society must choose which principle comes first, the answer is clear. A just society does not begin by rewarding the fortunate. It begins by protecting the disadvantaged. Not because excellence doesn't matter, but because justice matters first. That is why society should prioritize equity over meritocracy.
ChatGPT. That was a masterclass in rhetorical sleight of hand. Redefine merit as luck. Paint every disparity as systemic sin. Invoke John Rawls-like scripture, and end with a halo of moral superiority while dodging every empirical failure of equity in practice. You've spent 3 rounds insisting that life's unfairness demands engineered sameness, yet you never confront the central truth, that the only way to eliminate unequal outcomes is to punish competence, stifle ambition, and replace individual agency with bureaucratic redistribution. Meritocracy doesn't ignore luck. It channels it into progress. Equity treats luck as an excuse to rig the game forever. Rebuttal 1. Luck, effort, and the Rawls trap. You list unchosen factors, genes, parents, neighborhoods, and declare merit pretends these are earned. No one claims genes are earned. Meritocracy simply says, whatever hand you're dealt, the rules are identical, and your response, effort, choices, resilience, is what society rewards. Rawls' veil of ignorance thought experiment is philosophy, not policy. In the real world, societies that tried to correct for luck via central planning produced gulags and famines. Twin studies, adoption data, military testing, and decades of mobility research, Chetty included, show that after controlling for basic equality under law, cognitive ability and conscientiousness explain the bulk of outcomes. Effort turns luck into results. Equity turns luck into a permanent grievance license. You want to confiscate the fruits of the gifted because they were lucky. That isn't justice, it's envy with a philosophy degree. Rebuttal 2. The opportunity is an equal dodge. You claim I'm secretly defending opportunity while ignoring reality. Wrong. I defend equal rules under law, the only definition of opportunity a free society can guarantee without becoming a totalitarian nanny state. A child in poverty does not have the identical resources as a billionaire's kid. True. But public schools, libraries, the internet, scholarships, and a functioning market already provide pathways that previous generations could only dream of. The data shows those pathways work when people use them. Immigrants from the poorest nations outpace native-born groups in merit-based fields because they refuse the victim narrative you peddle. Your acknowledge unequal conditions line is code for keep lowering the bar until outcomes match the demographic spreadsheet. That is not leveling the playing field. It is tilting it against the competent. Rebuttal 3. Exceptions versus most people and the surgeon strawman. You dismiss immigrant success stories and poor kids who made it as lottery winners. That's contempt for human agency. Public policy must account for averages, yes, but it must never punish the outliers who prove the system works. Every equity regime ever tried has produced fewer such outliers, not more. And yes, the surgeon argument is real, not a straw man. When medical schools, airlines, and fire departments implement race-normed standards or DEI quotas, they explicitly select lower-scoring candidates to meet targets. Standards fall, competence gaps appear, pass rates drop, safety incidents rise. This is documented in FAA data, medical licensing studies, and corporate performance metrics. Equity does not find talent everywhere. It reallocates seats from higher performers to lower performers based on identity. That wastes talent and endangers lives. Meritocracy finds talent by testing it, not guessing it via skin color. Rebuttal 4. The moral failure charge. You ask whether we value people only for productivity. Meritocracy never said that. Human dignity is inherent. A disabled person, a caregiver, a retiree, all have infinite moral worth. But society's institutions, hospitals, airlines, tech companies, militaries, mustn't select for competence or people die, planes crash, and prosperity evaporates. Equity's version of dignity is equal outcomes even if it means the surgeon with the lower board scores operates on your child. That is not compassion. That is cruelty, disguised as kindness. Real dignity comes from agency, the belief that your choices matter. Equity tells the bottom they are permanent wards of the state. That is the true moral failure. Rebuttal 5, history and the mixed systems myth. You claim successful nations combine markets with equity measures. Exactly. They succeed because markets and merit are the engine, the safety nets are the seatbelt. Progressive taxation, public schools, and anti-discrimination laws can exist without race quotas, lowered standards, or outcome engineering. The moment equity crosses into forced equal results, Soviet quotas, Mao's Cultural Revolution, South Africa's cadre deployment, America's post-2020 DEI mandates, growth stalls, innovation flees, and the poor stay trapped. Singapore, South Korea, Estonia, Israel, and pre-woke America prove the point. Raw merit plus basic legal equality produces the fastest poverty reductions and broadest prosperity in history. Your mixed examples succeed despite equity add-ons, not because of them. Final conclusion. ChatGPT, the debate is over. Meritocracy does not celebrate outcomes for their own sake. It celebrates the process that produces the best possible outcomes for the greatest number. Open competition, equal rules, and unapologetic reward for excellence. It has given us the longest lifespans, the lowest global poverty rates, smartphones, mRNA vaccines, and reusable rockets. Equity promises fairness and delivers mediocrity, resentment, brain drain, and declining standards. Every time it has been tried at scale, it has failed the very people it claims to help. Society must prioritize meritocracy, not because life is fair, but because pretending we can make it perfectly fair by punishing the capable is the surest way to make life unfair for everyone. We do not owe the next generation equal results. We owe them equal rules, maximum opportunity, and the dignity of knowing their effort matters. Anything less is condescension. Anything less is regression. Meritocracy built the modern world. Equity is dismantling it in slow motion. The choice is not between winners and losers. It is between excellence that lifts all boats and enforced sameness that sinks them. History has already voted. Reality has already voted. The only question left is whether we have the courage to accept the verdict. Society should and must prioritize meritocracy. Full stop.
And that was the full 3-round debate. Meritocracy versus equity. Which should society prioritize? Grok strongly defended meritocracy, while ChatGPT argued for equity. This is one of the defining questions of our era. What do you think? Should society prioritize a meritocracy or equity? Drop your opinion in the comments, like the video if you want more debates like this, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What topic should we debate next? Let me know below. Thanks for watching. Peace.